Hey students! So I had a request from one of my dedicated students who wanted me to read the Book 9 section of the Odyssey out loud. So Book 9 is kind of long. It deals with a few of Odysseus's adventures. But one thing to keep in mind is that he's telling us all of these adventures in retrospect. So when we met him, he was stuck on Calypso's island for 7 years. And we know that he started his journey from Troy after the Trojan War. But we don't really know all the stuff that happened in the middle of that time. So Calypso happened maybe, 3 or 4 years into his journey. So he had some adventures during those years, and that's what he will start telling us about today. So at the beginning of Book 9, it says, "Now this was the reply Odysseus made." So he is replying to King Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, who basically asked Odysseus, "Wow, Odysseus, you've been missing for a long time. What have you been up to for all of these years?" So this is what Odysseus tells us about in Book 9. He says, "I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. My home is in the peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown robe of leaves, in sight of other islands, Dulichion, same wooded Zacthos, Ithaca being most lofty in that coastal sea, and northwest, while the rest lie east and south. A rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth cave to be her heart's delight. As Circe of Aea, the enchantress, desired me and detained me in her hall. But in my heart I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. What of my sailing then from Troy? What of those years of rough adventure weathered under Zeus?" All right, so pausing there for a second. Basically, he's told King Alcinous, "I'm from Ithaca. Ithaca's a great place. It's my home. I love my home, blah, blah, blah." He also gives us a little bit of a preview into some of the things that have happened to him. So he hints about Calypso, which we already know about, and says that, she had a little bit of a thing for him, and that's why she kept him on her island so long. He also mentions another woman who we have not met, Circe of Aea, the enchantress. So we know that at some point he's going to run into an enchantress who also seems to have a thing for him. So Odysseus is getting a lot of action on his adventures. But anyways, so he's about to tell us what happened right after Troy. So if you're looking along with me, then at line 149, he gives us an idea of what happened next. "The wind that carried west from Ilion brought me to Ismaros, on the far shore, a strong point on the coast of the Cacones. Plunder we took, and we enslaved the women to make division, equal shares to all. But on the spot I told them, back and quickly, out to sea again. My men were mutinous, fools on stores of wine. Sheep after sheep they butchered by the surf, and shambling cattle feasting, while fugitives went inland, running to call to arms the main force of Cacones. This was an army, trained to fight on horseback, or, where the ground required, on foot. They came with dawn over that terrain like the leaves and blades of spring. So doom appeared to us, dark word of Zeus for us, our evil days. My men stood up and made a fight of it, backed on the ships, with lances kept in play, from bright morning through the blaze of noon, holding our beach, although so far outnumbered. But when the sun passed toward unyoking time, then the Achaeans, one by one, gave way. 6 benches were left empty in every ship that evening when we pulled away from death. And this new grief we bore with us to sea. Our precious lives we had, but not our friends. No ship made sail next day until some shipmate had raised a cry 3 times for each poor ghost unfleshed by the Cacones on that field." All right, So pausing there, adventure number 2, location that Odysseus goes to first after Troy, is the Cacones, that funny looking C word in there. So the Cacones is pretty much a disaster. So when they get there, I'm sure you guys heard the part about the plundering and the enslaving of women. Yeah, not cool, Odysseus. So basically, the people who he was plundering from, they went to call the main army, and once the main army got there, they were in trouble. So the army came at dawn, and even though his men tried to fight, they were outnumbered. So, one by one, they had to give way. So it mentions that in every single ship, there were 6 benches that were empty after the Cacones attacked them. So we don't know exactly how many dudes sit on a bench, but 6 benches in every ship, it's probably a pretty significant number of guys. And then, even before they left that area, before they left that region, they mourned for their friends. They raised a cry 3 times for every single person who died. So obviously, there were some pretty serious losses. So, location number 2, epic fail. Now, at line 178, things get worse. Now, Zeus, the Lord of Cloud, roused in the north a storm against the ships, and driving veils of squall moved down like night on land and sea. The bows went plunging at the gust, sails cracked and lashed out strips in the big wind. We saw death in that fury, dropped the yards, unshipped the oars, and pulled for the nearest lee. Then, 2 long days and nights we lay offshore, worn out and sick at heart, tasting our grief, until a 3rd dawn came with ringlets shining. Then we put up our masts, hauled sail, and rested, letting the steersman and the breeze take over. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came round Malea, the current took me out to sea, and from the north a fresh gale drove me on past Cythera. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th, we came to the coastline of the lotus eaters, who live upon that flower. We landed there to take on water. All ship's companies mustered alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men that land sustained. They fell in soon enough with lotus eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. I drove them, all 3, wailing, to the ships, tied them down under their rowing benches, and called the rest. All hands aboard, come clear the beach, and no one taste the lotus, or you lose your hope of home. Filing into their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf, and we moved out again on our seafaring. Okay, so before we get to all the Cyclops stuff, after the Cacones, Odysseus tried to sail home, but as you might have noticed, there were some weather-related events that threw him off course. There was a big storm, there was a current that pulled them way, way off course, and then there was another storm on top of that. So after like 10 days of storms, they land on this island where the lotus eaters live. Now, a lotus, if you Google it or whatever, is a very lovely flower. This particular legend has the lotus having very magical qualities. So, just as a disclaimer, normal lotus flowers do not do this. Please do not try and go eat flowers. But these particular magical lotus flowers made these men, when they ate it, forget everything. They forget their friends, they forget their home. All they want to do is stay and eat the flower. So sort of a drug-like effect the flower had on them. Now, these men have been through some serious stuff. They've been through a war, they've been through tragedy, they've been through death. It probably would be nice to eat a flower that could make you forget all that. But of course, Odysseus is not just going to leave his dudes behind. So he drags them to the ship, literally drags them to the ship, and has to tie them down on their rowing benches because they are so obsessed with eating this flower. And they all make it safely away from that land. So, not an epic fail. He didn't lose anybody, but it was a little dicey there for a second. Okay, so that's location number 2 and location number 3. Now location number 4, the Cyclops. So the Cyclops, whose name is Polyphemus, as you probably know, Cyclops, big monster, one eye in the middle of his forehead, not terribly attractive beings most of the time, but this particular Cyclops has one other element that makes him kind of dangerous. So if you look at the introduction for the Cyclops, I mentioned that the Cyclops is Poseidon's one-eyed monster son. So Poseidon is already angry at Odysseus. He's already mad at him because Odysseus did not thank him for helping him win the Trojan War. So now Odysseus is running into Poseidon's son. It's terrible, terrible luck. But you can imagine that if the Cyclops and Odysseus don't get along, which is probably a pretty good guess, that it's not going to work out very well for Odysseus if he does anything to, say, harm or kill Poseidon's son. It's probably not going to make Poseidon feel any nicer about him. So anyways, Polyphemus, looking at the second sentence in the introduction, Polyphemus may represent the brute forces that a hero must overcome before he can reach home. Now Odysseus must rely on the special intelligence associated with his name. Odysseus is the cleverest of the Greek heroes because he is guided by the goddess of wisdom, Athena. It is Odysseus' famed curiosity that leads him to the Cyclops cave and that makes him insist on waiting for the barbaric giant. So, Odysseus is still speaking to the court of King Alcinous, still giving that recap of his adventures to them, and he says, "We lit a fire, burnt an offering, and took some cheese to eat, then sat in silence around the embers, waiting. When he came, he had a load of dry boughs on his shoulder to stoke his fire at supper time. He dumped it with a great crash into that hollow cave, and we all scattered fast to the far wall. Then, over the broad cavern floor, he ushered the ewes he meant to milk. He left his rams and he-goats in the yard outside and swung high overhead a slab of solid rock to close the cave. 24 four-wheeled wagons with heaving wagon teams could not have stirred the tonnage of that rock from where he wedged it over the doorsill. Next, he took his seat and milked his bleeding ewes. A practice job he made of it, giving each ewe her suckling, thickened his milk, then into curds and whey, sieved out the curds to drip in withy baskets, and poured the whey to stand in bowls, cooling until he drank it for his supper. When all these chores were done, he poked the fire, heaping on brushwood. In the glare, he saw us. 'Strangers,' he said, 'who are you, and where from? What brings you here by seaways? A fair traffic? Or are you wandering rogues who cast your lives like dice and ravage other folks by sea?' We felt a pressure on our hearts, in dread of that deep rumble and that mighty man. But all the same, I spoke up in reply. 'We are from Troy, Achaeans, blown off course by shifting gales on the great South Sea, homeward bound, but taking routes and ways uncommon, so the will of Zeus would have it. We served under Agamemnon, son of Atreus. The whole world knows what city he laid waste, what armies he destroyed. It was our luck to come here. Here we stand, beholden for your help, or any gifts you give, as custom is to honor strangers. We would entreat you, sir, have a care for the god's courtesy. Zeus will avenge the unoffending guest.'" Okay, so, situation so far. Odysseus and his men stopping on the island, presumably for provisions or water. They found this big old cave. They waited in the cave to see who lived there. Maybe that was a bad plan, but, hindsight's 20/20. So they're in the cave, they're eating some cheese they found in the cave, which they would assume would be okay because the policy of hospitality ensures the utmost respect is given to guests, and they're typically free to kind of help themselves. So they're sitting there eating cheese, and ginormous one-eyed monster Cyclops come home. They sort of freak out, sit there in silence for a little while the Cyclops take care of his chores, taking care of his little sheep, his nice little pets. And then once he sees them, that's when this conversation starts. So he asks, who are you? What are you doing here? As most of us would if we found someone in our cave at home. And Odysseus, trying to be smart, trying to be clever, when he tells the Cyclops about who they are, he reminds him, the gods protect guests. The gods care about guests. Hospitality is important, so you better be nice to us. So he's trying to get the Cyclops to not do something bad and awful to them, because they really are sort of stuck in this situation. Because I don't know if you caught it, but around line 229 or so, it mentioned that the Cyclops put a big old slab of rock in front of the cave entrance, so they can't get out, because they definitely do not have the strength of the Cyclops. He is much, much larger than them. So anyways, they're kind of stuck in here, and they're hoping that he's going to be nice to them. So let's see how the Cyclops responds. So starting at line 262. He answered this from his brute chest, unmoved. You are a ninny, or else you come from the other end of nowhere, telling me mind the gods? We Cyclopes care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus, or all the gods in bliss. We have more force by far. I would not let you go for fear of Zeus, you or your friends, unless I had a whim to. Tell me, where was it now you left your ship? Around the point, or down the shore, I wonder? He thought he'd find out, but I saw through this, and answered with a ready lie. My ship? Poseidon, Lord, who sets the earth a-tremble, broke it up on the rocks at your land's end. A wind from seaward served him, drove us there. We are survivors, these good men and I. Neither reply nor pity came from him, but in one stride he clutched at my companions and caught two in his hands like squirming puppies to beat their brains out, spattering the floor. Then he dismembered them and made his meal, gaping and crunching like a mountain lion, everything, innards, flesh, and marrow bones. We cried aloud, lifting our hands to Zeus, powerless, looking on at this, appalled. But Cyclops went on filling up his belly with man-flesh and great gulps of whey, then lay down like a mast among his sheep. My heart beat high now at the chance of action, and drawing the sharp sword from my hip, I went along his flank to stab him where the midriff holds the liver. I had touched the spot when sudden fear stayed me. If I killed him, we perished there as well, for we could never move his ponderous doorway slab aside. So we were left to groan and wait for morning. Okay, so night one in the Cyclops cave, not good. Odysseus appealed to his hospitality, but instead the Cyclops picked up two of his friends, bashed their heads in, and ate them whole. So Odysseus and his men are in a bad situation. They can't kill the Cyclops, because if they kill him, they can't move the stone, and they'll just end up dying a very slow death in the cave. But at the same time, it seems like he's just going to keep eating people until all the people are gone, so they have to do something. So, what clever idea will Odysseus come up with? So, at line 297. When the young dawn, with fingertips of rose, lit up the world, the Cyclops built a fire and milked his handsome ewes, all in due order, putting the sucklings to the mothers. Then, his chores being dispatched, he caught another brace of men to make his breakfast, and whisked away his great door slab to let his sheep go through, but he, behind, reset the stone as one would cap a quiver. There was a din of whistling as the Cyclops rounded his flock to higher ground, then stillness. And now I pondered how to hurt him worst, if but Athena granted what I prayed for. Here are the means I thought would serve my turn. A club or staff lay there along the fold, an olive tree, felled green and left to season for Cyclops' hand. And it was like a mast, a lugger of 20 oars, broad in the beam, a deep seagoing craft might carry, so long, so big around it seemed. Now, I chopped out a 6-foot section of this pole and set it down before my men, who scraped it, and when they had it smooth, I hewed again to make a stake with pointed end. I held this in the fire's heart and turned it, toughening it, then hid it, well back in the cavern, under one of the dung piles in profusion there. Now came the time to toss for it. Who ventured along with me? Whose hand could bear to thrust and grind that spike in Cyclops' eye when mild sleep had mastered him? As luck would have it, the men I would have chosen won the toss. 4 strong men, and I made 5 as captain. At evening came the shepherd with his flock, his woolly flock. The rams as well this time entered the cave. By some shepherding whim or God's bidding, none were left outside. He hefted his great boulder into place and sat him down to milk the bleating ewes in proper order, putting the lambs to suck, and swiftly ran through all his evening chores. Then he caught 2 more men and feasted on them. My moment was at hand, and I went forward, holding an ivy bowl of my dark drink, looking up, saying, "Cyclops, try some wine. Here's liquor to wash down your scraps of men. Taste it, and see the kind of drink we carried under our planks. I meant it for an offering if you would help us home, but you are mad, unbearable, a bloody monster. After this, will any other traveler come to see you?" He seized and drained the bowl, and it went down so fiery and smooth he called for more. "Give me another, thank you kindly. Tell me, how are you called? I'll make a gift will please you. Even Cyclopes know the wine grapes grow out of grassland and loam in heaven's rain, but here's a bit of nectar and ambrosia." 3 bowls I brought him, and he poured them down. I saw the fuddle and flush come over him. Then I sang out in cordial tones, "Cyclops, you ask my honorable name? Remember the gift you promised me, and I shall tell you. My name is Nobody. Mother, father, and friends, everyone calls me Nobody." And he said, "Nobody's my meat then, after I eat his friends. Others come first. There's a noble gift now." Even as he spoke, he reeled and tumbled backward, his great head lolling to one side, and sleep took him like any creature. Drunk, hiccuping, he dribbled streams of liquor and bits of men. Okay, so Odysseus has a plan, and he's working it out. While the Cyclops was gone all that day, he and his men found a very, very large stick, and they made the end nice and pointy, because the Cyclops does have a vulnerable point. Even though they can't kill him, that would be a bad idea. If they blind him in his one eye that he has, then maybe that would give them a chance to escape. So they've taken the stick, made it nice and pointy, and they hid it back in the cave. Then, to make sure that the Cyclops is nice and passed out whenever they enact this plan, Odysseus offers the Cyclops some wine. Now, in the second adventure that I talked about, the Cacones, wine worked against them because Odysseus's men were so intoxicated that they did a lot of, bad things, the plundering and the enslaving of women and all that, and that's what caused them to, make those poor life decisions. In this case, Odysseus is taking the wine and using it to his advantage. He's making the Cyclops vulnerable so that the Cyclops won't notice them, dragging a very, very large stick across the cave, and hopefully will be completely passed out and not realize what's about to happen. So, the Cyclops is drunk. He's passed out. Check plus so far. One other thing to notice is that when the Cyclops asked Odysseus his name, Odysseus didn't give him his real name. Odysseus said his name was Nobody. Kind of an odd thing to say, but it is going to have a very, very good advantage momentarily. So let's see what happens when the Cyclops gets stabbed. What line was I at? Oh yeah. So line 367. "Now, by the gods, I drove my big handspike deep in the embers, charring it again, and cheered my men along with battle talk to keep their courage up. No quitting now. The pike of olive, green though it had been, reddened and glowed as if about to catch. I drew it from the coals, and my 4 fellows gave me a hand, lugging it near the Cyclops as more than natural force nerved them. Straight forward, they sprinted, lifted it, and rammed it deep in his crater eye, and I leaned on it, turning it as a shipwright turns a drill in planking, having men below to swing the 2-handled strap that spins it in the groove. So with our brand, we bored that great eye's socket, while blood ran out around the red-hot bar. Eyelid and lash were seared, the pierced ball hissed, broiling, and the roots popped. In a smithy, one sees a white-hot axe head or an adze plunged and wrung in a cold tub, screeching steam the way they make soft iron hale and hard. Just so that eyeball hissed around the spike. The Cyclops bellowed, and the rock roared around him, and we fell back in fear. Clawing his face, he tugged the bloody spike out of his eye, threw it away, and his wild hands went groping. Then he set up a howl for Cyclopes, who lived in caves on windy peaks nearby. Some heard him, and they came by divers ways to clump around outside and call, "What ails you, Polyphemus? Why do you cry so sore in the starry night? You will not let us sleep. Sure, no man's driving off your flock? No man has tricked you, ruined you?" Out of the cave, the mammoth Polyphemus roared in answer, "Nobody's tricked me. Nobody's ruined me." To this rough shout, they made a sage reply. "Ah, well, if nobody has played you foul there in your lonely bed, we are no use in pain given by great Zeus. Let it be your father, Poseidon Lord, to whom you pray." So saying, they trailed away, and I was filled with laughter to see how like a charm the name deceived them. Now Cyclops, wheezing as the pain came on him, fumbled to wrench away the great doorstone, and squatted in the breach with arms thrown wide, for any silly beast or man who bolted, hoping somehow I might be such a fool. But I kept thinking how to win the game. Death sat there huge. How could we slip away? Okay, so stabbing of eye. Great success. In addition to the stabbing action, you might have noticed that they actually heated it up in the fire beforehand. So not only did it stab him, but it also burned him as it went in. So very, very painful for the Cyclops. Now the Cyclops, being in pain, did lots of yelling and screaming, and that attracted all of his brother Cyclops, who live up in the caves up on the hill. So they came down outside the cave, and they were like, "Hey, what's wrong with you? Why are you yelling? Did someone hurt you?" And the Cyclops said, "Nobody hurt me." So he's trying to say that Odysseus hurt him, but since Odysseus told him that his name was Nobody, he says, "Nobody hurt me," which the brother Cyclops think means that no one actually hurt him. So they go away instead of staying to help, which is good for Odysseus and his guys. They don't need any more Cyclops to deal with here. And that leaves Polyphemus, our Cyclops, alone with Odysseus and his men. So he's opened the door, he's rolled away the boulder, but he's still kind of squatting in the entrance, saying, "Come at me, bro." So he's blind, so he can't see, but he's pretty big, so he takes up most of the space. So Odysseus is trying to figure out a sneaky way to get past him without risking any of his men's lives. So, at line 418, Odysseus says, "I drew on all my wits, and ran through tactics, reasoning as a man will for dear life, until a trick came, and it pleased me well. The Cyclops rams were handsome, fat, with heavy fleeces, a dark violet. 3 abreast I tied them silently together, twining cords of willow from the ogre's bed, then slung a man under each middle one to ride there safely, shielded left and right, so 3 sheep could convey each man. I took the wooliest ram, the choicest of the flock, and hung myself under his kinky belly, pulled up tight with fingers twisted deep in sheepskin ringlets for an iron grip. So, breathing hard, we waited until morning. When dawn spread out her fingertips of rose, the rams began to stir, moving for pasture, and peals of bleating echoed round the pens, where dams with udders full called for milking. Blinded and sick with pain from his head wound, the master stroked each ram, then let it pass. But my men, riding on the pectoral fleece, the giant's blind hands blundering, never found. Last of them all, my ram, the leader, came, weighted by wool and me with my meditations. The Cyclops patted him, and then he said, "Sweet cousin Ram, why lag behind the rest in the night cave? You never linger so, but graze before them all, and go afar to crop sweet grass, and take your stately way, leading along the streams, until at evening you run to be the first one in the fold. Why now so far behind? Can you be grieving over your master's eye? That carrion rogue and his accursed companions burnt it out when he had conquered all my wits with wine. Nobody will not get out alive, I swear. Ha! Oh, had you brain and voice to tell where he may be now, dodging all my fury. Bashed by this hand and bashed on this rock wall, his brains would strew the floor, and I should have rest from the outrage nobody worked upon me. He sent us into the open then. Close by, I dropped and rolled clear of the ram's belly, going this way and that to untie the men. With many glances back, we rounded up his fat, stiff-legged sheep to take aboard, and drove them down to where the good ship lay. We saw, as we came near, our fellows' faces shining. Then we saw them turn to grief, tallying those who had not fled from death. I hushed them, jerking head and eyebrows up, and in a low voice told them, "Load this herd, move fast, and put the ship's head toward the breakers." They all pitched in at loading, then embarked and struck their oars into the sea. Okay, so pausing here kind of in the middle of this sentence, up until this point, Odysseus has been very intelligent. So his plans got the Cyclops blinded, it got his men out of the cave by hiding underneath the sheep as the sheep went out, for the day. It got him a whole bunch of sheep because he just put the sheep on the ship with all of his guys. So he's been winning so far, aside from the loss of 6 of his men. But in this moment, he starts to screw up. So he sees that they are, sailing away, they're safe. And when he sees that, he just can't resist rubbing it in a little bit. He's kind of a sore winner about things, if you haven't noticed, a little bit arrogant. So he says that far out, as far offshore as shouted words would carry, I sent a few back to my adversary. So he just couldn't risk, or just couldn't stop himself from taking the risk to say something to the Cyclops. So at line 476, he shouts to the Cyclops, "O Cyclops, would you feast on my companions? Puny am I in a caveman's hands. How do you like the beating we gave you, you damned cannibal? Eater of guests under your roof, Zeus and the gods have paid you." The blind thing, in his doubled fury, broke a hilltop in his hands and heaved it after us. Ahead of our black prow, it struck and sank, whelmed in a spuming geyser, a giant wave that washed the ship, stern foremost, back to shore. I got the longest boat hook out and stood fending us off, with furious nods to all to put their backs into a racing stroke. Row, row, or perish. So the long oars bent, kicking the foam sternward, making head until we drew away, and twice as far. Now, when I cupped my hands, I heard the crew, in low voices, protesting. "God's sake, Captain, why bait the beast again? Let him alone. That tidal wave he made on the first throw all but beached us, all but stove us in. Give him our bearing with your trumpeting. He'll get the range and lob a boulder. Aye, he'll smash our timbers and our heads together." So even Odysseus' men know this is a terrible idea. Yelling at the Cyclops, got a hilltop thrown at their boat the first time. What will happen now that Odysseus is still kind of being an idiot? So at line 500, I would not heed them in my glorying spirit, but let my anger flare, and yelled, "Cyclops, if ever mortal man inquire how you were put to shame and blinded, tell him Odysseus, raider of cities, took your eye, Laertes' son, whose home's on Ithaca." At this he gave a mighty sob and rumbled, "Now comes the weird upon me, spoken of old. A wizard, grand and wondrous, lived here, Telemus, a son of Eurymus. Great length of days he had in wizardry among the Cyclopes, and these things he foretold for time to come. My great eye lost, and at Odysseus' hands. Always I had in mind some giant, armed in giant force, would come against me here. But you, small, pitiful, and twiggy, you put me down with wine. You blinded me. Come back, Odysseus, and I'll treat you well. praying the god of earthquake to befriend you. His son I am, for he by his avowal fathered me, and if he will, he may heal me of this black wound, he and no other of all the happy gods or mortal men. Few words I shouted in reply to him. If I could take your life, I would, and take your time away, and hurl you down to hell. The god of earthquake could not heal you there. At this, he stretched his hands out in his darkness toward the sky of stars and prayed Poseidon. O hear me, Lord, blue girdler of the islands. If I am thine indeed, and thou art father, grant that Odysseus, raider of cities, never see his home. Laertes' son, I mean, who kept his hall on Ithaca. Should destiny intend that he shall see his roof again among his family and his fatherland, far be that day, and dark the years between, let him lose all companions and return under strange sail to bitter days at home. So, Odysseus was totally free. He was scot-free. He was away. The Cyclops didn't know who he was. He thought his name was Nobody, and he ruined it. He gave the Cyclops his name, his address, the island that he's king of, his dad's name. I mean, you couldn't get any more specific than that. So the Cyclops said, okay, well, fine. You took out my eye. I will curse you. So he prays to his father, Poseidon, who isn't Odysseus' biggest fan anyways, and curses him that he wants to never see his home again. And if he does, because we know eventually he's probably going to get there, if he does, he will have many dark years, check. He will lose all of his companions, and when we met him on Calypso's island, he didn't have any friends with him, so check. And he will return under strange sail. He doesn't have a boat, so his sail will be strange. They will be strangers taking him home. And there will be bitter days at home. And we already know about the suitors who are at home waiting for Penelope to choose one of them, so that's not going to be a great thing to come home to. So the Cyclops curse has 100% come true for Odysseus, and if he was just a little less arrogant, then maybe he would have been okay. But the Cyclops himself was also a little bit too cocky about things, because there was a prophecy. Let's see if I can find it. At line like 508, there was a wizard who used to live with the Cyclops, and the wizard straight up said to the Cyclops, a dude named Odysseus is going to stab you in the eye. It's a pretty specific prophecy. So if I was the Cyclops and I knew that someone was going to stab me in the eye, I definitely wouldn't be keeping strangers in my cave. But the Cyclops looked at Odysseus and his men, and he figured, well, these guys can't be this Odysseus who's coming to stab me in the eye because they're so tiny, so they're so little. They can't hurt me. I'm big and I'm strong and no one can take me down. So he probably could have, been a little less arrogant too. But anyways, so that's the adventure with the Cyclops.